In the last episode, you built a complete toolkit, 6 elements to look for in any method section: sample size, eligibility criteria, outcome measurement, blinding, classification system, statistical analysis. Now we open the actual methods section of a real landmark paper, Oser et al., 2012, and apply every single one of those 6 elements, line by line, exactly as written. This is where the toolkit becomes a habit. First, the study sample. The authors checked the records of all patients surgically treated with implants between May 1997 and January 2001 at 2 departments of the University of Bern. From those records, 358 patients met the eligibility criteria. All 358 were contacted. 303 completed the 10-year examination. 55 patients, 15.4%, did not. This is a retrospective cohort with one group and no comparison arm. For this design, the relevant question is not statistical power, it's attrition. And the authors don't hide it. Table 3 in the paper lists every reason, patient by patient. 1 patient was pregnant. 6 had passed away during the 10-year period. 6 could no longer be located. 9 could not attend due to severe illness, including dementia. 16 had moved away or were living abroad. 17 simply declined. This is exactly the kind of transparency you should be looking for. The authors didn't just report a percentage. They reported the reasons, and reading those reasons matters. 6 deaths and 9 cases of severe illness suggest that at least some of the missing 15.4% may have been in worse health than the 303 who returned. That's a real, if modest, limitation worth carrying into how you interpret the final survival and success rates. Second, eligibility criteria. Inclusion was specific. Partially edentulous patients only, at least 1 tissue-level implant with an SLA surface, specifically the Straumann dental implant system, treatment at one of 2 departments at the University of Bern, written informed consent. The study followed the Declaration of Helsinki. This population is not a random sample of every implant patient worldwide. It is a relatively healthy, partially edentulous population, treated under standardized academic conditions, largely without bone grafting. 70% of sites had sufficient native bone volume. The authors themselves note that roughly 70% of all 511 implants were placed by a single experienced surgeon, Daniel Busser. So before you apply a 98.8% survival rate to your own patients, ask the question we built in the last episode: do my patients look like these patients? If your patient is healthy, has good bone volume, and you have strong surgical experience, this evidence applies directly. If your patient smokes heavily, has uncontrolled systemic disease, or needs extensive grafting, you are extrapolating beyond what this study actually tested. Third, outcome measurement. Here the methods get specific and measurable. At the 10-year follow-up, the authors collected a structured set of parameters: modified plaque index and modified sulcus bleeding index at 6 sites around each implant. Probing depth measured with a periodontal probe to the nearest millimeter, also at 6 sites. The DIM value, distance from the implant shoulder to the mucosal margin, and the DIB value, distance from the implant shoulder to the first bone-to-implant contact, measured on periapical radiographs using the long cone technique. What was measured? Defined, specific clinical and radiographic parameters, not vague impressions. How was it measured? Each method is referenced to a previously published protocol. This is good practice. It means another researcher could replicate the same measurement the same way. Who measured it? This is where you slow down. The DIB value, arguably the most clinically important radiographic measurement in the entire study, was assessed by an experienced examiner, explicitly identified in the paper as SJ, one examiner. No second examiner is mentioned. No inter-examiner reliability score is reported anywhere in the methods. This doesn't mean the measurements are wrong. It means you cannot independently verify their consistency from outside the study. A single experienced examiner is a reasonable approach for a study of this size, but it is a limitation worth noting. Fourth, blinding. This is a retrospective cohort study with a single group. There is no second treatment arm to blind anyone to. You cannot blind a patient to the fact that they already have an SLA implant in their mouth. But one blinding question is still worth asking. Was the examiner who classified each implant, a periodontist identified as GS, blinded to anything? The paper does not state that GS was blinded to patient history, smoking status, or prior complications when applying the classification criteria. In a retrospective cohort like this, that absence of blinding is expected and not unusual, but it's worth noting precisely because the classification step involves clinical judgment, not just objective measurement. This is a good example of how blinding applies differently across study designs. In an RCT, the absence of blinding would be a major red flag. Here, in a single-arm retrospective cohort, it's a minor expected limitation. Fifth, the classification system. This is where Buser 2012 becomes the clearest teaching example in this entire series. The paper defines Table 1, criteria of success, explicitly, absence of persistent subjective complaints, such as pain or dysesthesia, absence of a peri-implant infection with suppuration, absence of mobility, absence of a continuous radiolucency around the implant. All 4 criteria must be met for an implant to be classified as successful. Then Table 2 defines 3 categories. A removed, lost, mobile, or fractured implant is a failure. An implant with a history of acute infection with suppuration and progressive bone loss, even if currently stable, is classified as surviving, not successful. Only an implant meeting all 4 success criteria is classified as successful. The survival rate combines successful and surviving implants, 98.8%. The success rate counts only the implants meeting all 4 strict criteria, 97.0%. The gap between those two numbers, 1.8%, represents 9 implants that are still functioning in the mouth but carry a documented history of biological complications. If this paper had only reported 98.8% survival in a marketing summary, you would have missed the fact that 9 implants had a real history of infection and bone loss. Reading the classification system in the methods is what reveals that nuance. Sixth, statistical analysis. The methods ends with a single short paragraph. Mean values plus or minus standard deviations, ranges, and frequency distributions are presented. Descriptive statistics were generated using SAS statistical software, version 9.2. That's it. No p-values, no confidence intervals, no comparison testing of any kind. Does the statistical approach match the study design? Yes, completely. This is a single-arm retrospective cohort. There is no second group to compare against. Descriptive statistics are not a limitation here. They are the correct and only appropriate choice. It reports exactly what the design allows: clean, honest, descriptive numbers. So here is what applying all 6 elements gives you: a retrospective cohort of 303 patients with 511 implants. 15.4% loss to follow-up, transparently explained. A relatively healthy, partially edentulous population treated under expert academic conditions. Clearly defined and referenced outcome measurements taken by a single examiner without reported inter-examiner reliability. No blinding, appropriately given the single-arm design. A precise 3-tier classification system separating success from survival. And purely descriptive statistics, exactly matching what a single-arm cohort allows. None of this makes Buser 2012 a weak study. It is, by every measure we've built in this series, A well-designed and honestly reported piece of evidence. But you are no longer simply told that the implants survived at 98.8%. You now know exactly what that number includes, what nuances underlie the reported 98.8% survival rate, what it excludes, who measured it, and under what conditions it was achieved. That is what the methods section gives you when you know how to read it. Next episode, the results. Now that you understand exactly how this study was built, let's look at what the data actually showed, table by table, figure by figure. Episode 7, the results. How to read a scientific paper, dental depth.